the thing that we are. And what I would say to that, again, if we think about hiring, focusing exclusively on recruitment, yeah, absolutely, you might see short-term impact, but of course, there is a real challenge there, because if you are bringing people into an organization and asking them to join in a culture that isn't inclusive, there's a real risk to that person. There's a real risk to being, say, the single woman on a team, for example. If that culture is not inclusive, then you are the person who is going to be experiencing that non-inclusive culture. And also, you might be probably, whether it's explicit or not, there might be an expectation that you're the one that's going to shift it, that people will communicate differently simply because you're there, which isn't really a reasonable expectation. And just some of the risks, I suppose, really inherent in this approach, that focus on recruitment without the follow-up focus on culture and sustaining inclusion. People might leave the industry, which is a huge problem already. People leaving that are already underrepresented at the start. People are likely to lose confidence and interest if they have that negative experience. There is also research around a quite harmful narrative to say that, well, they didn't stick it, or they weren't tough enough, or they weren't suited. So this kind of really harmful narrative that gets embedded a little bit. And then I suppose the bottom line is, if you've spent a lot of time and thought and effort and care doing a really good recruitment effort, if you aren't kind of following up with anything, then all that effort is wasted for both you and for the person you've brought on into the team. So that was a snapshot summary of some of the really important findings that came through in our research, and just to share some of the reasoning why we wanted to focus on this as the Honeycomb Works and as Culture Plus. But I wanted to just stop there, and I'm going to pass over to Melissa and to the panel, who are no doubt going to pick up some of these and bring some other thoughts to the table and just have a really great conversation. So Melissa, over to you to introduce yourself and the panel.
Great, thanks so much. So hi everyone, I'm Melissa Sabel. I'm the founder and CEO of the Honeycomb Works. And yeah, so I'm not going to say that much about me because I want to introduce you to our brilliant panel. I have the absolute privilege today to speak to four of the people I probably respect a bit the most in the work that we do. So we've got two brilliant founders in James and Rebecca, two people who are have big ambitions for driving technological innovation and breakthroughs while at the same time prioritizing ethics and inclusion. And whenever I hear them speak, I learn something new. And I'm going to let them do the more official bio when they answer their first question. But I think just a absolute privilege to hear from them. And then Pavneet and Brian, who work with startups and scale ups. So they've got the perspective of working with a number of different startups and scale ups and seeing the patterns and issues. And again, both of them have just such a brilliant, strategic, yet really strongly grounded in ethics and inclusion perspective that they bring to everything they do. And again, every conversation I have with them, they give me something new to think about or a new way to approach things. So I'm really excited, not just about all these individuals that we got together, but bringing them all together at once, to me, I think is going to be a brilliant conversation. So before we jump into my questions, just a reminder that you can share your questions through either, I think there's a Q&A panel, but if you don't want to share it publicly, you can send it to hosts and just to hosts and panelists. And we're going to basically do this, have this a Q&A session with the panelists. Then we're going to do a little bit of a lightning talk to talk through some key steps and checklists and things that you can put into practice immediately. And then we're going to do the audience Q&A. So you've got plenty of time to ask your questions. Just a note, Rebecca has to actually sign off at 1:45. So if you do have questions specifically for her, we're going to follow up and get those and send them with a follow-up response. So we're going to jump in now to the first question. And first I'm going to go to James and ask him, what do we actually mean when we talk about inclusive recruitment?
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you to Melissa and Honeycomb Works for organizing this webinar and also for inviting me. Always a pleasure to be involved in your initiatives. So yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think when we talk about inclusive recruitment, we really need to think about what lens we're looking at that through. So obviously, there's a lot of tremendously good work that's been happening around gender, around ethnicity, but actually there's a lot more to it. So when we think about it, we need to think about neurodiversity, we need to talk about class, we need to talk about education, we need to talk about sexual orientation. And with all of that, we also have to remember there's an intersectionality about it, right? So we're not just one thing. All of us are some part of a mixture of all of those things. So when we talk about inclusive recruitment, I think it's being very thoughtful and purposeful with the practices that we embed within our organizations, because if you do that, you'll ultimately hopefully cater to as many people as possible. So that means we're not doing a piecemeal attempt of, okay, we're catering for this characteristic and this characteristics. When I think about myself, I am one person. I don't want to go to 20 different marches for all the things that are important to me. As I say, I have an intersectionality about me. So ultimately, I think if we can all ensure that we have intentional and purposeful practices, it means that we're ultimately fighting for the same thing, which is, equality in opportunities and also unconditional belonging in our workplaces and in society. So we might as well fight the fight together is what I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important point when we talk about intersectionality, about how we have all those different aspects to our identity, but also how those aspects of identity influence how we are treated and how people respond to us. So I often like to tell people, if you say you're focusing on gender, what you actually mean is you're focusing on white cisgendered straight women, because you are always going to be focusing on the most privileged section of that group. So so really important and when you design for everyone, you create a better process design for everyone. Pavneet, I want to jump to you now. When we think about, so if we think about that's the sort of fundamental approach, one of the first things people start thinking about is the role. What do we need to bring into the team? So how do you think about role design in a way that helps you develop that more diverse candidate pool?
Yeah, it is a good question. And you say it is often the first thing people think about, but in my world, it often isn't the first thing people think about. And to build on to what James has said, thoughtful, intentional, purposeful role design is super critical to start with first. Because often when we think about hiring or fulfilling an immediate need within the team, particularly in a small team that's growing quite quickly, we enter into this default mode. We default into replicating the existing role. We focus on the title that we need to fulfill, or the experience of the previous person. We may want to sort of replicate replicate the person that we're trying to fill the role for. But what that limits us with is thinking about the essential criteria that is important to job design and role design. So often we've all seen job adverts that specify a certain number of years of experience, or that require a certain level of education or a particular qualification. And often that comes from a previous person in that position having that particular profile, and we think that's awesome, so we want to replicate it. But what that does is create the barriers to, as you and James have just said, to access and perpetuate some of those privileges that exist within hiring processes. So when we start to list things like years of experience, or we must have had this qualification, or they must have worked in these types of organization, we're not creating a fair and broad access to attract a wider talent pool, where we want to be able to open up our talent pool to those who have potentially not had linear careers, who have not had the same level of traditional access to career paths or qualifications. And when we do that, we are then perpetuating the biases that exist and offering opportunities to privileged groups. And so taking that, as James said, that thoughtful and purposeful approach within the design is, and really thinking about the shape of the role is really important. And so the starting point that I would always advise is thinking about the purpose of the role and the impact that we want that role to have. So why do we need this role to exist within our organization? What problem are we trying to solve as a result of this role within our organization specifically? How will this role contribute to our organization's goals? And actually honing in on what that means for our specific, unique organization, not just labeling somebody a marketing manager and going to find a marketing manager, actually identifying what that means for our organizations. And that helps us to really hone in on the skills and qualifications or the specificness that is absolutely essential and relevant for our role. And it enables us to also challenge our assumptions around what we need. We may think we need to fill a role of a marketing manager or an engineering manager, and that role profile has to look like this. But that may not be right for the makeup of our team, for the makeup of our organization, for the stage of growth that we're at as a business. So it is important to really think about what that means for our organization. And there's a simple way that I often suggest thinking about this, and I'm always about the practical takeaways when I'm talking about some of this guidance. So thinking about them with a model that I use called the 3 A's: action, ability, and attitude. And with action, what do we want that role to do and achieve? What are the outputs of that role? And are we communicating that well within our job advert or within our role description? With ability, what are the absolutely essential skills and that are technically relevant to this role, that anyone who doesn't have can't do the job? And with attitude, it sort of links to what Marin said at the beginning around culture fit. We don't want somebody to fit a particular mold that may be pre-existing within our own mind. We want someone to enhance the culture of our organization. We want to communicate to them how we work and how they can contribute to the long-term success. So if we're thinking about articulating the job design within those 3 buckets, we're able to make that really specific to our organization, rather than, as you said, creating a role that may exist in such a broad way that actually has historically been creating barriers to access for many individuals and many groups.
Yeah, that's great. I love the three-step approach profile, but I think, you know, that fundamental point of just what is the outcome and what is the critical outcome, because when you are small and growing, you kind of need people to fit multiple spaces. But if you don't specify that up front, it doesn't mean that somebody won't come in and fill multiple spaces, but don't define that to start. Just start with a specific outcome that you need them to fill. And Brian, on that, I want to come to you now, because I know you think a lot about strategy and leadership and the role of the founder leader in the organization as they're shaping the future of their organization. How does role design and team design fit into that?
I think expanding the view a little bit, of course, companies are a team process, and you know, this is a team activity, and teams win, and teams are better than individuals in solving complex problems and addressing complex situations, because of course you need quite disparate and different points of view and skill sets in order to face complexity and do something useful with it. And I think too often many companies will try to not look at the long-term need to build teams, and there is a very short-term need to hire stars. And this is what Avneet was talking about a bit with replicant hiring, which is a great Blade Runner term of we're hiring replicants, and that's not really the point. The point isn't to have magical job descriptions. The point is to not be seduced by this notion of we're hiring a rock star who will take care of all of our needs. We really should be looking at a leadership responsibility of convening teams, and it's much harder to do initially in terms of how do you structure this and attract people and organize them and manage them and grow them to actually be much more effective as a unit rather than a series of individuals. But that's really the call to action, and that's the first alibi, I think, that many founders and CEOs and startup leaders will tell themselves, which is, well, we don't have time to do this, or I think this is some sort of a 24-step McKinsey process that is just too heavy and we can't do it, and we're fast and nimble and we break things and all this other stuff. There are all these alibis, and yet the longer term need, the more robust, the more fulfilling outcome. And this is what James said, if the outcome is unconditional belonging, then you actually have to plan for it at the beginning. And that means you have to embrace all of the messiness of the differences that will get you to a truly inclusive team to get things to work together. So the call to action really is for basically management 101 for founders and CEOs and leaders in startups, which is your job is to convene teams. And a team is when every member wants and works for the success of every other member. And that doesn't happen easily or naturally. And that's why it's difficult. And that's the work of leadership.
Yeah, really good point. And I think the notion of working fast and breaking things, a lot of the folks on this call, they're in medical devices, they're in climate tech, they're building bridges. We don't want them to break things. And I think we're also talking about, we're starting to evolve our view of innovation, and that breaking of things is not actually working for us for society. So I think a really good segue to Rebecca, because I know that this is one of the things that she talks about a lot in terms of the responsibility of technology. And I know that I can't go to one networking event without somebody telling me they're a founder of a company who's got a inclusive recruitment platform, which is great because it's a problem to solve. But then a lot of times they'll tell me about it and I'll get kind of scared. So I'd love, Rebecca, for you to help us out for founders who are maybe being presented with a lot of technological solutions to solve this problem of inclusion of bias in the recruitment process. What should they be looking for? What questions should they be asking?
Thank you, Melissa. It's an honor to be here today. You're absolutely right. Move fast and fix things, right? So
Much better.
that's the new motto. And if you're recruiting and using online tools or technical tools in any way, there's a good chance that you're interacting with AI. And it's important to be aware of when you're interacting with AI and what the potential pitfalls might be there for diversity and equity and inclusion. So one of the times you're going to be interacting with AI is when you're working with an applicant tracking platform or an applicant search. Another time is when you're working with an applicant search platform, such as LinkedIn. So for instance, LinkedIn has recruiter tools that you can use to search for candidates. And we're so used to search now that we often don't think about the fact that search is surfacing some candidates and not surfacing others based off of various characteristics. And applicant tracking platforms, including the one built into LinkedIn, but including whatever other one you might be using, they will often rank candidates for you based off of some input you put into that system or based off of how you rated other candidates or interacted with other candidates. So let me discuss a few things to look out for. I'm not going to recommend any particular platform, but explain the type of vigilance that's needed when using these tools, and actually perhaps encourage you to avoid using them when possible, and explain why. So machine learning will often pick up on biases that we explicitly try to keep that algorithm from picking up on. So to give you an old example, both Google and Amazon were created recruitment filters in their systems based on machine learning, looking at previous people who'd been accepted to the company. And they both believed that they built algorithms that for instance, did not discriminate based off of gender. But what they found several years into using these systems was that these systems had discriminated based off of gender for multiple years before they noticed this and before they removed those systems. So one example that they found was that their algorithm was promoting people who had the word woman's in the name of the activity that they were engaging in. So for instance, if you were the captain of the chess club in high school, this was a positive sign for recruitment. But if you were the captain of the women's chess club, this was actually a negative sign for recruitment. Not everything is that blatant. Sometimes it's based off of names. Sometimes these sorts of things are more primitive, and a lot of applicant systems have learned how to avoid recruiting people named John, for instance. But you can get into greater nuances where these kinds of biases persist. So, for example, one firm, it turned out that their applicant system was looking for people who had anime as a hobby, because that what a lot of the people at that company enjoyed anime. That came up on CVs, and so now people who liked anime were probably qualified candidates. And you can see when I'm saying this why a biased algorithm might not actually be helping you find the most capable people, but they might feel like really great culture fits when you meet them, and you might feel that your algorithm's doing a fantastic job. These biases can get a bit more insidious as well when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because people from diverse backgrounds can have a set of skills that are reflected with non-traditional experiences. So, for instance, a woman who has spent time at home, not in the workforce because she's raising children, or for other reasons having to do with having been raised in a gendered background, might have experiences that look like leading a volunteer organization, or managing the volunteers for their children's school. And this doesn't look like a traditional management position, and many women may not put this on their CV at all, or articulate it in a way that your applicant tracking software is able to really recognize it as a positive experience for the job that they're going into. And I'd love to list more examples, but part of the problem is that humans are so diverse, and there are so many ways that we can develop valuable skills and valuable experiences that we bring to the workforce. But the AI algorithms that we've created are looking for something that's typical and common, especially typical and common among the people that you've hired or people that are in positions in that industry. So outliers are often demoted by these algorithms. If Einstein were alive today, especially early in his career, he might have trouble breaking into the physics industry. He wouldn't look like a good candidate, because machine learning is terrible with outliers. You tend to machine learning works by ignoring outliers, and outliers are often the most fantastic people for our organizations, and to really drive a team to success. And also, those people often come from diverse backgrounds, and it's something to look out for. Not because I'm particularly convinced that you'll find an AI system that doesn't have these problems. I think they all will. But if you are using AI in your applicant tracking program or in your search program, because you're using one of those platforms, despite my recommendation that you don't. Please just keep in mind that these biases are there, and that you will be missing out on great candidates, and that you should have initiatives that go beyond these AI tools. Because if you don't, you will miss out on some fantastic candidates that have backgrounds that are different from what you expect to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you put that in terms of what machine learning is terrible at. It almost feels like it's the wrong solution to, like, it's the opposite. Like, what we need in to have a unbiased and inclusive recruitment policy process that's going to get the best candidate, we almost need the opposite of machine learning, which is trained to look for the most common patterns, because you want to find the outliers and the exceptions. So so it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I want to bring it back to James, because I want to focus specifically a bit on the engineering challenge, because a lot of times what we hear is, well, we need a really specific specialization and expertise. And, you know, we often hear that it's a pipeline problem. There just simply aren't that many people with this level of expertise. And there's probably a little bit of a question back to the role design piece. But, you know, I'd love your perspective as somebody who's working in a highly specialized technical environment. Is it a pipeline problem?
No, I don't think it is a pipeline problem. I think when we use that statement of it's a pipeline problem, it's kind of putting the issue to someone else. So it's sort of like, well, oh, sorry, I can't have a diverse team because the people aren't coming. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of work and studies to show that there's so much diversity in the people coming into all these different programs in science and engineering throughout, basically. But what I think is important is for us to actually think about, okay, how am I as an organization doing what I can to ensure that I attract a diverse pool of people? So the pipeline is definitely there. I think we can put that argument to bed. So we need to think about, where am I actually going to get the pipeline? So talking about some of the things that have been mentioned already by others is looking at, one, the role and how you're designing it, but also thinking about, what are the sources of the people that what is the source of the candidates that I'm getting? So to Rebecca's point, if you're going to essentially hire the same type of people from the same type of schools, from the same types of organizations and the same network, of course you're going to have homophily.
Well, like anime.
Exactly. You're going to get the same kind of person. And we all know why that's bad for business. Again, we're going to leave those stats to the side because we know that they're true. So we need to think about, how do we actually build a pipeline of people, not just for us, but also for the future. So thinking about starting early on to be able to encourage young kids to see, what does an engineer do? What can they do in engineering? Not just the classic, they've got a helmet on and they're, you know, walking around with a clipboard. I work in an industry where we work with cells, you know, there's people who work with textiles. There's all these things that people can actually interact with. But also importantly, bringing people in from a young age makes them see what an engineer can look like, right? So it's not just the classic thing that we see. Then there's tons of networking opportunities that we as organizations can give people from underrepresented backgrounds. So we can engage with things like the Royal Academy of Engineering's JEEP program. There's tons of alumni groups. I'm part of countless groups around kind of race and STEM, future talent, all these groups that actively have the pipeline, which is there, and they're trying to bring it to people who have these roles so they can actually see. Because, you know, similar to what Rebecca was saying, they're just not getting the opportunity because they don't fit that quick checklist that is there for you know, what are to some extent fairly archaic ways of recruiting. As has been highlighted here, the outliers is really where I also agree is where the amazing people are, and it's in that diversity of not just who they are as a person, but their diversity in their experience, which you might not necessarily be able to tangibly get from just screening a CV. So I think those are the important things when we think about the pipeline. So I don't think it is a pipeline problem at all. And I think even people, the chief diversity officer at Uber, Boyang Lee, also said it's not a pipeline thing. It's about how we actually diversify where we interact with people. It's not just where we hire from, but actually are people able to know what we do and what we represent. I think those are some of the important things. So, and one other thing I'll add is if you are using recruiters as agents, then actually are they inclusive in their recruitment processes, right? Are they only going to Russell Group or Ivy League universities and going to the golf clubs, etc., to interact with people? Then if that's the case, obviously you're going to get the same sort of person coming through. So I think those are some of the important things when we talk about the pipeline. Is I don't think it is a pipeline thing. I think it is, what do we do to interact with the diverse pool of people that is there? And I often say this, which is from a book I read, which is, diversity is a reality, inclusion is a choice. So the diversity is real and it's there. We just have to decide to be inclusive of that diversity that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rebecca, I think you wanted to jump in there.
Oh, I just wanted to tag on to what James was saying about recruiters. Also, what recruitment platforms your recruiters are using that might filter out diverse candidates precisely because they're diverse. It's something to ask about, and to be frank, they probably are depending on artificial intelligence in a way that discourages inclusivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. I think many recruiters, again, will also at this point say, yes, we have an inclusive recruitment process. Important to ask the follow-up question. Tell me about it. How are you doing that? And when they come back to you and say, sorry, we couldn't get you a diverse candidate pool, just to not accept it. And that will shift the industry, right? If people start saying, well, then you can't actually be a very good recruiter then, can you? Because you're not opening up the wealth of talent that there is out there in the world. And I think also the important thing to remember is the more inclusive you are as an organization, the more of a draw you are to the top talent who will choose not to go to places that are not inclusive. So I think it's also a big benefit. And I did want to, so Pavneet, I think one of the really big questions is, and to pick up on Brian's point a little bit earlier about, I don't have time to put forth a 34-point McKinsey strategy on how I'm going to do inclusion. And most of the people doing the hiring, doing the interviews, are doing this on top of a very demanding day job. And we've all seen good processes put into place that don't actually get followed in the real politic of getting things done. So how would you advise supporting people to not, once the candidate pool comes in, wonderfully diverse group of candidates, how do you actually ensure that process of deciding who you're going to make an offer to is inclusive?
Yes, I love the way you phrase that question, and often it is that part of that question is part of the challenge. They're often told that it's on top of their day job, when it should actually be an integral part of the organization's work and therefore their role is important in supporting that. So shifting what that means, it's not just an add-on, it is a really integral part to growing and accelerating the organization. So often when we plug in a new tool or a new process and we simply tell our managers to press play and, as you say, chuck it on top, but the way that they interact with the tools, the way that they interact with the people is a really integral part of that process. And as Rebecca said as well, we can't always rely on the algorithm. So it's important that the managers or those who are managing the process are not only relying on that and actually have a really good understanding of why we are doing this, for what reason. So it is a bit of we need a bit of a shift in mindset from the managers checking boxes in a process and logging scores and saying yes and hiring a particular candidate and seeing it as a transactional process, to, as Brian said, to seeing their role as building their team and accelerating and growing their team that is designed to enhance the effectiveness of the organization. James a minute ago spoke about looking out into the market, but what I'm talking about now is looking within. So in order to get the managers to fully understand this is an integral part of their role, is to communicate why we believe that making these changes to the recruitment process, to our methodology, is important to our organization's success. Not only it's a nice thing to do in the corner, we've got this new tool and you all can play with it and it's going to be great. So really getting them to understand the role that they play in shaping that and ensure that they understand the bigger picture. They're now part of creating this positive change within the organization, not just using a new tool for the tool's sake. And it shouldn't be an add-on to their job. It should be an integral part of their role as a leader or a manager. So I worked with a company recently who wanted to broaden their talent pool, and in a similar way that James described a minute ago, building a social mobility program, expanding their reach, but it do nothing internally to understand the changes that needed to be made in order for a new group of people to enter the organization and live well. And so their culture was crafted in a way that for over many years for people to feel comfortable who were privately school educated, who came from high income families, and their main social activity was a ski trip for the year, for example. So actually the viability of a social mobility program, it would be really tricky. Would it be long lasting? Would it work? Would those people who enter the organization feel welcomed, accepted, being able to thrive? Going back to right at the beginning, Moran was talking about this idea of changing the culture first before looking at hiring diversity. But some of the things, going back to your question, sorry, I don't want to go too much off piece, going back to your question on what support did managers have, it was talking about classism within the organization, talking about what social mobility really means, what changes do we need to make within our interactions with each other in order to broaden our mindset, to break down some of those barriers to access. So having those discussions as a group, looking at how they interact with one another, having other people within the recruitment process to challenge their thinking if bias creeps in. So it is around ensuring that we're thinking very thoughtfully about what it is that we need to change within our small team in order for this to work in the long term. And coming back to why are we doing this? For what reasons? What's our long-term goal, and why is it connected to the organization? Once we're able to understand that, and it sounds heavy, but it really isn't. It's really just an articulation of rationale. We're not seeing it as an add-on to our job. It's an integral part of our job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see, James, you've got your hand up, but before I'm conscious, Rebecca, I think you need to sign off. So I don't know if there's any last thoughts that you wanted to share, or if not, I will say thank you so much for your time. And audience, again, if you do have questions you want specifically for Rebecca, send them through and we'll send them out in the follow-up.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, the last thing I guess I'd like to share is just a reminder that these AI systems, the thing that they're best at is making you feel like they work, which is what makes them so exciting. You look at something and you think, this feels like it works really well. But these AI systems are often feel like they work for precisely the reasons why they're not working as well as they should. They're playing to our biases, and really what we should be doing with our technical tools is using them to overcome our biases. So thank you so much for including me in this panel. It's been an honor to be on a panel with all of you, and I'll look forward to watching the rest of this online when I see the recording.
Thank you, Rebecca. I feel like we have to have a follow-up session just digging deeper into that, but yeah, sounds great.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we first started looking at the Honeycomb platform, doesn't matter if you don't know much about it, but the things that we were looking at were all these like wonderful psychometric personality tests, and people would come and say to us, it understands me so well. And we'd say, well, of course it is. You answered all the questions and it's playing back for you what you said. So, but there is that element of like, yes, this makes me feel like things are so much more under control, and this system seems really, really intelligent. And I think that's one of the things that we always have to caution ourselves with, or when we're looking at new technologies that are tackling some really serious things that have big implications for fairness and equity. James, I think you wanted to share something from or add to what Pavneet was saying.
Yeah, it's just a quick note on what Pavneet was saying about that social mobility and the ski trips, or the sort of questions you ask. And it's even small things like there's an interesting anecdote and real thing that came up, which was in some of these like big assessment centers and stuff like that, they would ask like a question of like, okay, what's your favorite football team? And actually in that is so discriminatory of so many people, because actually certain types of people are less likely to have a football team. So immediately you've already made someone not feel welcome. So for instance, we know that typically maybe someone from a different sexual orientation or from a different ethnic background might not be associated with like those sort of sports because of the hooliganism or kind of bullying they may have experienced in younger years or in their adult life. So actually they don't resonate with that. So it's again thinking about neutralizing what you can do, that how you ask those sort of questions. So it might be instead of what's your favorite sports team, because I'm the guy who supports our team and I think everyone has a sports team. You might ask, okay, what hobbies do you have or do you enjoy or even aspire to? Because maybe someone is a caregiver where they don't necessarily have the time to have a hobby right now, but what could they aspire to? So it's again giving everyone an opportunity to not feel like they can't answer a question, or feel like, oh, actually, if everyone here has a sports team that they love and support and I'm the only one, then actually will I fit in this organization? So I think it's also it's those nuanced things, but again, if you just think about it and be intentional, I think it can help to overcome some of it.
Yeah, really good point. My first manager and I were obsessed with the New York Yankees, and I do think I got preferential treatment because we could talk stats and strategy and then move into how is he going to support me do my job better, whereas other people struggle to get that level of sort of rapport and just relationship built. So yeah, it's really interesting. And we're gonna pause for not pause, but we're gonna move over to Marin for about 10 minutes, who's gonna take us through some specific sort of step-by-step things that we can put into practice. But just before I do that, I wanted to say that at the Honeycomb Works, when we first started putting these things into practice, I did resist a bit because I felt like I had a lot of experience building diverse, high-performing teams. And it actually, when we first started, it took up a lot of time, but the results have been transformative. I mean, the team that we've been able to build is diverse in every sense of the word, and just really spectacular, if I do say so myself. So that's my endorsement for actually, even if it feels hard, putting in the time and effort to do so. Brian, do you have something quick to say before
very quickly? That's the crux of it, Melissa. There are no shortcuts. There are no leadership shortcuts to this. And again, oftentimes we'll tell ourselves, oh, this is a shortcut. Here's the alibi for me not to do this other work here. But that's such an important self-reflection exercise to go through, is, am I trying to take a shortcut here?
Yeah, I love that word alibi too. I think I'm going to be thinking about that when I think of a reason I shouldn't do something. Am I just giving myself an alibi?
No, it's because you're a Yankees fan, but we'll forgive you.
All right, we'll save that conversation for another day. Marin, over to you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the panel. It's just been brilliant to listen to all of that conversation, and please do add any questions anyone has to that Q&A. We have got time for that in just a few moments. But yeah, as Melissa said, I just wanted to very briefly share with you what we have done in Culture Plus to support with exactly these concerns actually that were coming through in the panel, and as a result of that research that we did. So what I'm about to share, for those of you who are in Culture Plus already, it's there, it's in the platform. You can go straight away and have a look. If you're not, don't worry. As I said, we'll send out a recording, and we'll also send some of these resources post today's session. But the first thing, and it came through so clearly in the panel, I think I wrote down thoughtful, purposeful, and intentional approach. And that is absolutely the core finding from the research and the foundation of everything that we've put in to support recruitment within the platform. If there's nothing else actually that sticks with you post this panel, let it be this. If you do not have an intentional, structured, evidence-based, accountable process, you're very, very likely to be unintentionally allowing bias and inequity to creep in, not because you intend that to be the case, but because that's where bias happens. It's when you don't have that structure and accountability in place. And what we did actually is we built a really specific 8-stage kind of process list, I suppose. And as you will see, it reflects back a lot of those needs that were mentioned on the panel. So I'll just give you a moment for that to come through. But the first one is really, we mentioned defining the requirements of the role. Pavneet explained the importance of that really clearly. And then looking at communicating about my organization, that's really thinking through where is my source? How am I making sure it's not that really narrow pipeline all the way through the entire process? And then we've got a little sneak peek here. This is a video recording. So yeah, this is, for those of you who are in the platform, this will be familiar. But as you can see, there is a specific recruitment focused area, and it just goes through the whole process, the whole way through. Looking for candidates, preparing, making sure your interviews are structured and, again, very evidence-based in terms of what you should be doing to make them as accessible as possible. And then crucially assessing your candidates and getting feedback. And then just a quick look at what that looks like. So I think it was Pavneet as well who mentioned the importance of the why. So this is where this information sits. We're not just telling you to do something, but there's a little bit of why it's important to do that information, what the impact of it will be. And then if you keep going there, you can see there are 4 really specific actions on that, on each section. And that really ties back to our belief around behavior and action and every person committing to doing the thing it is they need to do. And then the final thing I think I'll show you, there is an option to track your progress, which can be very helpful, give you a little bit of a boost to know you are making progress. And there is also a way to share, which I think really links to that idea of supporting managers, making sure everyone, maybe even your recruiters, the folks who are involved in this process, it's not enough that you know it. Does everybody else know it? Is everyone else on the same page? So then one more section I just wanted to show you. So thinking through the whole process. So at this point, we're kind of assuming that you have written and shared a job description, and you have appealed to as many candidates as possible and ran brilliant interviews that were structured and a really equitable and fair experience for everyone. I've chosen to dig into assessing candidates a little bit more because this one is really important that it's evidence-based. So the 4 key actions here, the first one is I use a set scoring system to evaluate candidates. You need a rubric. If you don't have it really clearly connected to what the job actually requires, you're not going to be able to objectively score people. The second one, maybe this is a bit more surprising, I don't discuss candidates' performance with other assessors before scoring. There's a lot of evidence around people shifting their opinions to try and come closer to people. It really is helpful to do that scoring before you then discuss with someone else. A third action there, and again, some of these might be surprising, they certainly have been in the past when we've shared them with folks. I keep any informal conversations completely separate from candidate scoring. Now, this one is about that comment about football or baseball, or for me, probably where your favorite place to go and eat is. We shouldn't be making decisions about who we hire based on liking the same football team. You can have that conversation by all means. It's a great idea to have conversations with people to help them relax, make sure, as James said, to make that as inclusive as possible, but don't use it as part of your assessment. If you do, then you are going to replicate. So that replicant hiring was the term used. And then finally, the last one there is about bias. So I acknowledge the part bias plays in assessing candidates. Getting rid of bias is not going to be possible, but a really important part of mitigating it is, just as I think Brian said as well, just taking a step back to think, am I holding myself accountable here? Is there an alibi that I am invoking for myself? Am I really sure that if someone asks me why this candidate and not that, you could say, well, this is the rubric, this is how they scored, this is my evidence, this is my decision making. Not, I just felt like we got on a bit better, or they just seem like they'd be a really good person in the organization. So it's just acknowledging that you are likely to have those thoughts and making sure they're not a big part of how you make the decision. And then I'm going to go very quickly. The very final thing I will say, which I think we have really mentioned, and is just to really hammer it home, it can't be the end. You have to keep going after this inclusive recruitment process, because it is about what happens when that person joins the team and sustaining a really positive culture to make sure they are able to belong as much as everybody else. And with that, Melissa, I might pass back over to you to share some final thoughts with folks on the call before our Q&A.
Rookie mistake, talking while on mute, how embarrassing. Yeah, so absolutely, we need to make sure that we are prioritizing those inclusive environments. And to get back to James's point about the pipeline problem, 1 in 10 women will leave the industry each year. So we are going to have a pipeline problem if we keep getting people to leave. And I know that one organization who came to us hired a wonderfully diverse cohort. They did a great job in their inclusive recruitment. They all left within 6 months because it was not a place where they felt like they could thrive. And the other point, racially minoritized engineers, 16 points more likely to leave the industry. And somebody pointed out to me that like in early education and engineering, folks from racially minoritized communities are actually overrepresented compared to the population. So throughout that entire process, we are treating these people so badly that by the time they are then getting to the point where they are underrepresented. But as James said, we are improving that representation. So it is about us in the workplace, making sure that we are taking that to the next level and making sure they feel like they belong in the industry. So really important to maintain that. On that, we did just want to say a big thank you to all the organizations who have participated in our research and in the platform. Like, these are all folks who are doing great work in the area. And and on that, there is an element of employer brand, not in a cynical way, but in a way that says we are making efforts to make sure that our environment is inclusive. And that does really mean something to candidates who probably have had negative experiences in other organizations. So it will be part of their criteria. And we are going to go back to panelists, back to the panelists in a moment. But I did want to, we are doing an offer for everyone on the call to do a free culture checkup. So basically you complete a survey where you answer some questions about where you are in your journey, and then you get a 60-minute session with a team to talk through your results and give you some recommendations on what you should be doing urgently next, your top priorities. So that's just for folks on the call, and there's a limited number of spots. So do go and sign up now. We've also got a demo of the platform coming on Friday if you want to join it, so you can sign up for that. If that's a little too much engagement for you at this point, you could just sign up for a newsletter, find out when the next events are, what's coming, and news from us. But we will be having a follow-up event on the inclusive recruitment. We've got a How to Be an Ally event coming up shortly in June for Pride. So lots of things happening. So we hope that you will stay in touch with us and keep engaged. But on that note, I think we are going to go back. We're going to go back to the panelists and start to ask your questions. We've had a couple of really good ones come through, and really glad. Thank you, Susie, that we have the perspective from the recruiter who's saying, what do we do? And I think you can look at this from a recruiter perspective, or you can look at this from the perspective of which we often have, the one person in the organization who's trying to drive inclusion and can't get everyone else to listen. But the question is, what advice would you give someone who's asking for more diversity, but they refuse to change the language and expectation around the experience that is required for the role they're hiring, and therefore it's impossible to send a diverse shortlist, and then probably being held accountable for the fact that there is no diverse shortlist? And it looks like, James, you were keen to answer this one.
Yeah, I mean, just to start off, and others can add, but I think I work with recruiters, and I actually love working with recruiters because it is a very good way of being able to hopefully tap into wider streams of people. But in particular to that question, I would say, it is about educating the people that you're working with. And I think the best relationships with recruiters I have is where it's very much relational and not transactional. So taking the time for them to understand me and the organization and what we need, and then me understand how they work. And in that, you learn how to best work together, things around communication, etc. But actually you bringing in the education of why it is important. And actually sometimes what I love is the recruiters I work with will sometimes be like, I've got one that's a bit different to what you're expecting, but have a look, so feel free to say, okay, I'm going to give you 75% of what you need, but I'll give you 25% of what I think actually could be some real gems. And this is why I think they could be a real gem because of X, Y, and Z. And I think it was Rebecca or Pavneet who was talking about how these non-traditional experiences can come out from different things that if I just look at a surface level CV, I might not get. But if you as the recruiter have taken the time to really speak to that person and understand what value they bring and why they could actually be a really good candidate for that role, then it makes it a much easier conversation. Whereas if you don't have that sort of background as to why this sort of more random CV would be good, then it's a bit harder. But yeah, so in essence, I would say it's really about educating the firm or company that you're working with, and also really taking the time to show the value of that diversity.
That's a really good point. I love that idea of this, like actually giving an example, right? Of saying, I know you don't believe me, but let me show you who you're missing out on, and bringing that to them, because it is a journey, right? I mean, then there's a reason that as a founder you're resistant to that, or as a leader, and it's because of these alibis or these things that we're telling ourselves we just simply don't have time for. Pavneet, I think you wanted to add to that as
I have
well.
just two quick things. One which is just to reinforce what Melissa was sharing earlier around the risk factors of not doing this right, and may sound a bit ranty and passionate, but it's really harmful to do this incorrectly. It's if we're hiring tokenistically, it's not only harmful on the organization, as Melissa shared with some of those statistics, but really harmful on the individuals who enter an organization that doesn't work for them, and they're potentially treated unfairly, potentially treated in a negative way, and they'll leave. So that's the passionate part of it. The practical part of my comment is, do you have any other success stories that you can share with your clients? So ways in which you have adapted the job description in a way that you believe is effective to widening the talent pool. Often sharing success stories is a winner to influence.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's a lot of perception. I mean, the first question I often get from folks when we sort of do a talk about inclusion and as it relates to recruitment and hiring is, well, what about merit? And, I think there's a perception that we're lowering the requirements when actually I think what's happening is we're raising the bar, because people are no longer getting in where this is being done well. People are no longer getting into roles because of a feeling or of I had a sense of potential in that person. They actually have to prove it. And I think that is making competition higher for certain groups. And so they're feeling now that they're being discriminated against when actually the bar is being raised. And I think, as you said, Pavneet, if you can show examples of where you've evidenced that somebody massively competent who's really impressive has gotten a role that they wouldn't have gotten because they didn't have certain textbook expectation things on their CV, is a great way of proving that. Brian, did you want to pick up on the merit thing?
Yes, you mentioned the M word, and this is another huge alibi. And this goes all the way back. I started recruiting in Silicon Valley in 1997, before the dot-com bubble. And the whole thing back then was, we want to hire software engineers, we want to hire software ninjas, and we only hire the most exceptional talent. And just about every company I've ever talked to talks about how we have a really, really high bar. And everyone starts believing their own press, and they start believing this whole thing about merit. And anytime anyone in power in an organization tells me about how they have a merit-based system or how they have a meritocracy, which is it's so incredibly presumptuous. to say, I'm CEO and we have a meritocracy here, because a meritocracy only exists if the merits are known to everyone. And I mean all of the merits known to everyone. And if the system, if this group is completely consistent, and as soon as either of those things are not true, even slightly, it's no longer a meritocracy. And there is just no way that large organizations or rapidly changing organizations with, let's face it, usually less experienced managers and leaders and people in power, there's just no way that those two things can be held in balance, because it's really, really difficult. And I'm not saying people shouldn't try, but I'm saying especially leaders need to be so careful about what they're telling themselves, these alibis. Oh no, we have a meritocracy here. It's just, it's really, really dangerous, because people will hear that. And the CEO, the founder or CEO, will move on from this commitment that they've made without even realizing that they've made and now broken the commitment. But everybody else will pick up on it. And then they'll wonder why it doesn't happen. So don't do it. Just avoid that one. That's your baseball metaphor, Melissa. That's a pitch that you should just stand there and let go right by. Say, not going to swing at that one. We can talk about merit, we can talk about effort, we can talk about these things in different ways. But usually the much, much healthier thing to do is to talk about, and this is just what Pavneet was saying about her 3 A's. If we talk about the work that we need to do and the impact of that work, then you can pull that through to expectations and you can pull that through to outcomes. And that's a much, much better way than talking about merit. Blah, 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 blah. I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, no, really, really, really great points. And I always say, if you sit, and I think that this is one of the things that founders and leaders, I think, often get wrong, is that just really confident statement that alienates a lot of people in the organization, because they're like, that's not my experience. That's not what I'm seeing. And, we often talk about striving to be good-ish as opposed to being good, because, and I think the more you can say that as a leader, like, this is our value, this is what we're trying to get to. We might not always get it right. Tell me when we're getting it wrong. Then the more people will be open to giving you that feedback, and being open to hearing that feedback is one of the really core components that when we work with organizations, we sort of start with as a baseline, to create, not just as a leader being able to hear that, but those cultures where people feel safe to share ideas and challenge each other when things aren't working. If you're coming from that place of mutual respect, then you feel like you can, and that somebody will act on it, then you can do that. If you don't have that, then it's really hard to give folks feedback. But Marin, I want to bring you in, because it looks like you wanted to add something to the merit conversation, which always is a good one to open the lid on.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to build on what Brian said, I think absolutely agree. And it also doesn't engage with the valuation, because the way merit is assessed. And there's a really interesting piece of research I was reading recently about early career stretch assignments. And like one of the key ways someone is brilliant or an exceptional performer is that they are able to stretch beyond their current role, and they have an opportunity and they absolutely do a brilliant job. And what this research found was that people who are underrepresented in engineering, so specifically they looked at gender and race in this study, that folks were being given access to these opportunities, not totally equally, but that had improved. But ultimately the assessment of folks who were either women or racially underrepresented was much, much harsher. So then they were, in theory, it was a meritocracy. They were given access, they were allowed to perform to their best ability, but then ultimately their assessment was much harsher. So then the meritocracy argument then is actually really damaging in that context, because it doesn't engage with what happens at that evaluation stage. So yeah, just to build on why I totally agree with Brian, and it isn't something we should be continuing to go back to.
Yeah, and also a reminder that we have to have that holistic approach, right? Because I mean, one of the things that we see is that people from underrepresented groups don't get the stretch assignments. So you fix that, and then you evaluate people from underrepresented folks harsher, so you don't get the benefit more harshly, and so you don't get a benefit. In fact, you might be causing more harm, because then they have not just a neutral mark, but a negative mark on their record. So yeah, it's really important that, and this is why we always say inclusion needs to be a lens through which you look at everything, not just a sort of siloed set of projects and initiatives that you do. So yeah, we did have another question here that might be more for Rebecca, and I might follow up with her on that. But I did want to share a few thoughts on it, which was back to that sort of AI systems and how we use them. And obviously, I mean, I love talking to Rebecca because she's the CEO of an AI company who's always telling me not to use AI. So which is great, but I mean, one of the question is, would it help if employers submit requirements but have an AI algorithm written by EDI specialists who know firsthand the barriers preventing diversity and inclusion to help widen the net and improve the candidates available? And I think from my perspective, like there's a bit of a muddle right now in terms of what actually we're talking about when we say AI, because it was a term that somebody coined. I don't remember how many years ago, but many years ago, like 25 years ago, and now is being used as a marketing term, probably more than as a technical term. And we might have some AI CEOs in the chat who might want to correct me on any of these pieces. But the fact is, we don't really have sort of a shared understanding or definition of what it is and when it's AI and when it's not AI. But once we talk about algorithms and rules, you're talking more about a transparent system where you can see how the decisions are being made and why they're being made. Mostly when we're talking about AI, we're talking about systems in which you can't see the reasoning. You're training it on a massive amount of data, and it's making decisions based on that are finding patterns and coming up with the statistically most likely collection of letters and numbers or answers to produce. So I do think there's space for rules and expertise that comes in and says we're applying this. I read an article that said AI could prevent us from eliminating people with gaps in their resumes. Why do we need AI to do that? And why would AI do that? All you need is a rule to say we don't eliminate people who have gaps in their. So like I feel like we're just sort of we're using this technical term that we're trying to throw at every problem that we have, because right now we've got this hammer, and so we're just looking for a bunch of nails to overuse an innovation metaphor. So I think we need to come back to what is the core problem we have to solve, and what is the best tool to use to solve that problem that ideally doesn't burn down a rainforest in the process of doing so. So that's not my thoughts. I will follow up with, I'll put that question also to Rebecca and see what she has to say about that and share it in the follow-ups. Do feel free to send some more questions, and we do have a little bit of time left. There was a question that I wanted to start with Brian, and then would love to get James and Pavneet's and take on. But it's we see a lot of organizations who run into challenges once they are sort of expanding beyond their core team. So that first group of people, and then they're growing beyond that. So how do you deal with that? So it might be when you get your first set of investment, or you get your first market traction, and so you started with a group of people, and now you're expanding out that team.
I think that the one consistency of startups really is that, even though they don't realize that necessarily, is that their businesses actually change, and not enough founders look at things through a change lens. And obviously they know intellectually, and they know probably emotionally, because they're getting beaten up every day, just how the organization is changing. But this notion, especially of moving from a phase where things are relatively understood because the team is relatively small, to the next phase where there are more people, and you've got to make that transition and do a lot of hiring and have a lot of new things happening. Most companies really don't start doing things differently. They still, they're usually thinking about the next phase, but they're using the mindset of a phase behind. And this is where Melissa, you were talking about how inclusivity actually should be part of an entire system. It's not just this HR thing over here, or this social justice thing over there. It's actually, how do you bring all these people together and all of their diverse magnificence and make the difference work? And that's where the growth, especially recruiting, the visible activity of recruiting will overwhelm some of these other more important and more lasting dynamics. So a team will focus on going from 5 to 10, and they'll just think of hiring these new 5 people in terms of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And a hiring manager will be responsible for this, and not enough inclusion of the existing team will be utilized. And actually, Pavneet mentioned this earlier about making people part of the change is exactly the point. And how do you tell the existing 5 people, look, let's figure out what's going to be different when we're now 10, and what's going to change? The start, stop, continue exercise is a great framework, but involve these people really, really early so they are part of the change. And every time they invite a new member in, every time person 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 comes in, there's a much more active dynamic of we're all changing together. And these are really hard lessons to learn if someone's not actually holding a mirror up to a founder, to a leadership team, because usually you only learn this once you've failed a couple of times and you've gone through it. So the whole point is to get some help earlier on and ask yourself these questions, and just use enough of the lens to make it really helpful.
Yeah, all really good points. And I think that interesting bit about that culture clash too, like we have a lot of, especially in the engineering space, organizations who might start as an academic spin out. So, and then bring in folks from industry, business whose role is different, right? So you might have the first group who are, trying to solve this really tough engineering problem and come from an academic environment. And then you have a group of people who are responsible for commercializing and selling and growing that organization. And sometimes that can feel like opposing forces. And then often also you've got a group of people who have equity and a group of people who don't have equity. And
yes.
I always say to my team when they feel bad that I've been working late, like, never feel sorry for a founder, because I have equity. So I've any incremental work that I put in, I'm doing because I ultimately am fundamentally tied to our success. So, which is, it's not the same if you're getting paid a salary. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you don't care, but I think founders often have this mentality that everybody should care the same amount as people who have equity in the business. And there's
another founder alibi.
Exactly.
And then they get pissed off when employee number 100 doesn't seem to have the same kind of devotion that employee number 4 had. And it's just like, well, look, how many other things how many other past tense experiences and past tense lenses are you using? Because that won't be the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're nearly at time, so I think I'm gonna just share our ways of staying in touch with us again, and then I might say, Pavneet, James, Brian, if you wanted to share any sort of final thoughts or final pieces of advice. I'm not going to ask you for like the one most important thing, because I feel like there's too many important things, and boiling it down to one important thing is or the most important thing is really difficult, and probably also really depends on where you are in the journey. But maybe just if there's a final piece of advice or something that you wanted to make sure that people are thinking about that we haven't covered, that would be great. Or any final thought. But just a reminder for folks, 3 ways to stay in touch with us or get some more support from us. One is book your culture checkup. Again, that's just for folks on this call, and limited spots available, but we'd love to help you just do a little bit of a check-in on where you are and what would be most beneficial for you to prioritize and focus on next. If you're curious about Culture Plus, which is a platform that supports people on behavior change and helps them develop new inclusive habits, and also gives you as an organization insights into what people are doing and not doing, and the things that you need to change in order to have that inclusive culture. And it doesn't actually just tell you what you want to hear or make it look like it seems to work. You're gonna see some harsh truths in there, but ones that help you grow and make a space of unconditional belonging. So if you want to learn more about that, there is a group demo this Friday. If you can't make it, get in touch and we can do we're happy to always schedule one-to-one demos. And then finally, if you want to just stay up to date on future events and other news from the Honeycomb Works, sign up to our newsletter. All the links are in the chat. So so yeah, we'd love to stay in touch. And but I will turn it back over to the panel for final thoughts. Pavneet, I might start with you, if that's all right.
Yep, sure, and nicely timed, because I'm building on what you've just said, harsh truths. And challenging the topic of this, recruitment isn't where you should be starting if you have not started your inclusion journey. And without looking inward, we can claim to be committed to inclusive recruitment all we want, but the outcomes for underrepresented communities won't change unless we look inward. So hopefully that's a message that you've heard from a lot of us today.
Absolutely. We were sneaky. We lured you in here because we know you want to hear about inclusive recruitment, but our message is you can't just focus on this. And actually, it shouldn't be the first thing you're focusing on. But we also know that you might have some investor pressure to hire or some growth. So we know that in the real world, you might have to work on these two things side by side, but at least side by side, if you're not able to focus on your culture first. Great message, really important. James, over to you.
I guess mine is building on from something that Brian said, which is, there is no shortcut. So you need to do the work. You just have to do it. And I think where possible, start as early as possible, integrate it, embed it, let it be the fabric. If you're later on in the journey, start now, because it is never too late and it's better to do that now. And I would say seek to learn. There's many organizations that are dedicated to this, like the Honeycomb Works, and there's many links that have been provided as to how you can engage. But yes, it takes effort because we are retraining and doing something different from the way things have been in the yesteryears. But we have to do it because I think it's the right thing to do. And most importantly, it is the human thing to do to, help everyone have the opportunity to reach their potential, which in areas like science and engineering could be of tremendous benefit to all of us. So I guess my key thing is do the work and seek to learn.
I think that's a brilliant point. When you're in a startup or a scale up, it is all about learning as you grow. You are going to make mistakes, but as long as you sort of have that mentality of I'm gonna learn from them, I'm gonna seek help, seek support. Yes, from the Honeycomb Works, but there are also other places that you can go and seek support from. I think it's really, really important. And yes, always evolve. And Brian, over to you.
Everybody needs help. And my plug for the Honeycomb Works is not only for the work that you do, Melissa, and the platform and the hard stuff in terms of the tangible things. It's also the network, and we're going to make change by recruiting communities of like-minded people who want to work for this and who will stand up for it. And so my plug is that if it's not the Honeycomb Works, you're going to have to look long and hard for someone better. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. That's brilliant. And I think, and also on that, I should mention the Royal Academy of Engineering, who are a massive supporter in us in building in both the Culture Plus platform and also in building this community of folks in engineering, specifically in the startup and scale up space who want to make a difference. They saw a challenge and they are really committing time and effort and resource. And I do think this is the very beginning of us building a really solid community of people who are supporting each other as well, because again, we'll all learn from each other. And yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant to be a part of, and more exciting things to come. Great. So Thank you. Massive thanks to the panel. I could have been talking to you for hours, so we will maybe have to schedule a follow-up continued discussion, maybe one on inclusive cultures rather than inclusive communication or inclusive recruitment. It could be inclusive communication one as well. Good topic. But I also wanted to extend a massive thank you to all the attendees for carving out the time. We know how difficult it is to carve out time for this work, and for your comments and questions and attention. And you will be getting a recording shortly, and we'll also be sharing some of the resources that Marin shared in the presentation if you aren't already in the Culture Plus platform. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon and hear from you shortly.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.